Opinion. What INSV Kaundinya actually stitches together, showcasing India's little discussed but long-standing maritime tradition, reached a nautical milestone with the launch of INSV Kaundinya at Karwar Naval Base in Karnataka last week. The recreation of an ancient Indian stitched ship as a joint venture between the Indian Navy and Ministry of Culture was discussed in a First Post article. Why recreating a 5th century stitched ship is as important as Chandrayaan. September 23, 2023. But even the name has a story. Writers like Amitav Ghosh, William Dalrymple, and Sanjeev Sanyal have dwelt on the Indian influence on the cultures of Southeast Asia thanks mainly to seaborne trade. But these are yet to become common knowledge in the way that, say, the life and times of Ashoka have in India. That is why the name Kaundinya is particularly apt for this stitched ship, as he was the first known Indian who sailed to Southeast Asia and ended up founding Cambodia's first Hindu kingdom. Kaundinya is thought to have hailed from India's east coast, probably somewhere in Ganjam district of Odisha or the adjoining Srikakulam district in Andhra, both of which were part of the ancient Kalinga kingdom and included the bustling Kalingapuram port. That is because Kaundinya is a gotra common to Brahmins in the southeastern Indian coastal region even today, indicating the ancient mariners' probable antecedents and reiterating Odisha's maritime legacy. The kingdom Kaundinya and Soma, founded nearly 2,000 years ago, is now referred to as Funan based on Chinese texts written over a millennium later, but contemporary Khmer sources cite names such as Shrestapura, Bhavapura, Vyadapura, and Ananditapura, pointing to its Indian Hindu links. The Indian propensity to not chronicle anything till relatively recently has led to Chinese records dominating the discourse, hence Funan is the better known name. Unfortunately, this also fuels the misconception that Southeast Asia has always been part of the Sinosphere rather than a Indic Hindu one. Despite their Indian-style architecture, Sanskrit-linked scripts, languages, and literature, Hindu deities, customs and philosophy, and even Hindu kingdoms like Kampa in Vietnam, Funan, and the Khmer Empire in Cambodia, Sriwijaya, Singasari, and Majapahit in Indonesia, and more. The INVS Kaundinya points to those old connections. Incidentally, even Kaundinya's marriage to Soma is not the only such instance. It is said that an Indian princess Wanghak Yellow Jade in Korean of Ayodhya sailed away to marry Emperor Kim Suro of Gaya in Korea and became Empress Hyo, not long after Kaundinya. Today, many Koreans claim descent from their 12 children. Curiously, the ancient burial mounds in Assam called Moidam are amazingly similar to those of Korean royalty, including that of Suro and Hyo. Tales of the connections between ancient India and the cultures and kingdoms of Southeast Asia and beyond have been far too persistent to be dismissed now as being without any basis. Academia, Western dominated as it has been, tended to firmly relegate such stories to the realms of mythology earlier, unwilling to even acknowledge that India had much of an international profile beyond the well-documented spread of Buddhism eastwards. India's Hinduism was sidelined. Thus, the story of the seafaring Kaundinya and his marriage to the Naga princess Soma nearly 2,000 years ago also never gained traction. That watershed event is remembered in Cambodia till today, but not many Indians visiting there are aware of it, even if they do know that Hinduism was once the main religion in the region, indicating ancient links with India. Even a cursory research reveals details about profound cross-cultural connections, going beyond architecture and culture. Hinduism's cultural influence seen there, hark back to their earliest kingdoms, but now there is even DNA proof that proto-historic Southeast Asians had Indian lineage, indicating a wide intermingling between the peoples of India and that region, probably even predating Kaundinya's arrival. Southeast Asian genealogies today have some Indian ancestry, but new studies on an ancient boy's skeleton in Cambodia have revealed a 4050 South Asian Indian DNA. Radiocarbon testing of that ancient boy's bone dated it to the early period of Funan, the kingdom Kaundinya co-founded, showing that the Indian gene flow to Cambodia started 1,000 years earlier than the previously posited 12th to 14th century on the strength of genetic studies of current populations. The researchers also say they expect to find further traces of interactions with South Asia India corroborated by archaeological evidence from about 4th century BCE. Paleogenomics does not make for racy reading, but its findings certainly add heft to the mythological stories of connections between the Hindu kingdoms and cultures of ancient India and the populations of Southeast Asia. Later in the first millennium CE, the Indian connection becomes too evident to gloss over, such as the arrival in 731 CE of a boy prince from Simhapura in Kampa Kingdom, now Vietnam, to ascend the Pallava throne in South India as Nandavarman II. That the INSV Kaundinya was launched on India's west coast is apt too. For millennia, ancient Indian ships set sail from Kambat, Kutch, and the Konkan coast to the west. The Sindhu-Sarasvati civilization had robust trade relations with the cultures of the Euphrates and Nile to its west, most of it conducted via the seas. Harappan seals found at Dilmun, now Bahrain, attest to the fact that it was an entrepot for goods from India like lapis lazuli, carnelian, pearls, and ivory. And later, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea mentions that cloths and precious stones, timbers and spices, particularly cinnamon and even iron, steel, skins and muslin, were transported from India mostly on Indian vessels and transhipped at Socotra Island or Cape Gardafui off the Horn of Africa from the 1st century CE onwards. Exploration of the huge Hawk Cave in Socotra has revealed many inscriptions more like graffiti really on its walls in ancient Brahmi script. Socotra is said to be derived from the Sanskrit name Dvipasukadara, island of bliss, or its Greek contraction Dioscorida. But the fact that there were many Hindus engaged in this trade is also underlined by their reverence for a deity named Socotriamata or Socotor Ma, propitiated by the seafarers to protect them from being shipwrecked. Temples were dedicated to her in Gujarat and Sindh, not only as Sikhodar Ma but also as Vahanvati, always depicted sitting in a boat. Coins of the Satavahana or Andhra dynasty 2nd century BCE to 3rd century CE featuring sailing ships that look astonishingly like the INSV Kaundinya point to the importance of maritime trade for that huge Hindu empire straddling the peninsula. They maintained many bustling ports including Bharuch, Sopara, and Kalyan on the Arabian Sea and Ghantasala and Makhilipatnam on east, trading with both Southeast Asia and the expansive Roman Empire to the west. Swipe left for next video. So, the good ship INSV Kaundinya stitches together the proto-history and history of maritime India, resurrecting not only the shipbuilding prowess of ancient Indians but also India's long-standing ties commercial and cultural down the millennia with the world. Later this year the wooden vessel will sail to Oman, retracing the route that other stitched Indian ships had made for centuries. May it always have fair winds and following seas as the old nautical blessing goes. The author is a freelance writer. Views expressed in the above piece are personal and solely those of the author. They do not necessarily reflect NEWS18's views. Latest blogs